Imagine for a second a time in history where the biggest thing, the only thing, determining if your entire town starves or survives is how you divide up your fields.
It's hard to picture now. But for centuries in the Middle Ages, that was the reality. The standard way of doing things meant that half of all your good farming land had to sit empty.
Every single year,
Yeah.
just doing nothing.
Exactly. And that was a recipe for disaster, especially when the population started to boom. That old method, what we call the two-field system, it was inefficient. It couldn't produce enough food for
The
everyone.
people were right on the edge of famine all the time.
They were. So today we're going to explore this really brilliant, simple organizational change that created enough extra food to not only save communities, but actually allow medieval society to flourish. It's called the three-field system.
And we're going to unpack exactly how this simple idea, just changing how you divide your land, led to so much more food, way better health for everyone, and even pushed new farming technology to be invented.
It's a fantastic story of how a smart idea can change everything.
Okay, so let's start with the problem itself, the old way, the two-field system. Paint us a picture of what that actually looked like for a medieval village.
Well, you'd take all the land the village could farm and you'd split it right down the middle. Two big sections.
Okay.
In any given year, you'd plant your crops, usually wheat or something similar, in field A, field B. You had to leave it completely empty. Fallow.
Why? Why leave it empty?
To let it rest.
Yeah.
To let the soil try to get some of its nutrients back naturally. But the problem is, that means a staggering 50% of your land is totally unproductive every year.
50%. That's a huge amount to waste when every single harvest is life or death.
It's deeply unsustainable. And as more people are born, you have more mouths to feed, but the same amount of land. That wasted 50% becomes a dangerous liability.
So the system is heading for a collapse.
Right. And the solution they came up with was to reorganize the land into three nearly equal parts instead of two.
And that's the whole idea, just going from two fields to three.
That's the core of it. It sounds simple, but it was a genius move because instead of having half your land productive, you suddenly had 2/3 of it productive.
So let's look at the numbers there. Under the old system, 50% of the land is used. With the three-field system,
It jumps to about 66%.
that's an extra 16% of productive land. Now, on a spreadsheet, that might not sound like a world-changing number, but what did it mean in reality for the people on the ground?
In the real world, that 16% was everything. It was the difference between starving and surviving. It created that crucial food surplus.
So more food for people.
More food for people, yes, but also, and this is critical, more food for the animals. If you can feed your horses or oxen better, they get stronger, they can work longer, they can plow more land.
Which increases your farming capacity even more.
Exactly. So that 16% wasn't just profit, it was the buffer. It was the safety net that meant a bad storm or a crop disease didn't wipe out the entire village.
Okay, that makes total sense. So the pressure's off a little bit. Let's get into the mechanics then. If you divide the land into three, how do you keep the soil healthy? How do you avoid leaving half of it empty?
The key was a very strict 3-year rotation cycle. And importantly, they used different types of crops that actually helped each other.
So break that down for us. What's happening in each of those three fields every year?
Okay, so think of it as a rolling schedule. Let's call them field 1, 2, and 3. In year 1, field 1 gets planted in the autumn with winter crops, let's say wheat or rye.
Got it.
Field 2 gets planted in the spring with spring crops like oats, barley, or beans and peas. And field 3, that's the one that gets left fallow. It rests for the whole year.
And then the next year, everything shifts.
Everything shifts. The next year, field 1, which had winter wheat, now gets to rest. It becomes a fallow field. Field 2, which had the spring crops, now gets the winter wheat. And field 3, the one that was resting, gets planted with the spring crops. And it just keeps going like that forever.
So if you're a farmer in that village, you can't just plant whatever you want, whenever you want. Your entire life is now dictated by this communal, endless rotation. Why was following that so incredibly important?
Well, for one, soil health. These weren't little fenced-off gardens. They were often massive open fields that the whole village shared. If one farmer got lazy or selfish and decided to, skip the fallow year on his little strip of land,
You exhaust the soil.
he'd exhaust the soil, and that would hurt everyone else who was supposed to use that part of the big field the next year. It was a shared resource. You had to protect it for the group.
So that brings up the social side of this. How do you get a whole community, probably pretty set in its ways, to adopt this brand new, complicated system.
It was probably very difficult, but desperation is a powerful motivator. The constant threat of famine gave leaders, the village council or the local lord, a lot of leverage.
So they became mandatory.
It had to be. Cooperation became the rule for survival. It forced an organized social structure where decisions about planting, plowing, harvesting, they were all made as a community. It actually strengthened the bonds in the village.
That's fascinating. Okay, let's zoom in on the crops themselves. Field 1, the winter crops. You said wheat or rye. Why plant them in the late autumn, right before winter?
Because they're incredibly tough. Wheat and rye can basically sit dormant in the cold ground all winter, and then the second the weather gets warm in spring, they start growing.
And they're the first thing you can harvest.
First thing you harvest in the summer. And that was so important because after a long winter, food stores would be dangerously low. That first harvest of wheat for bread was what got everyone through to the next harvest. It was like their insurance policy against starvation.
The famine-proof crop.
Okay.
Now, what about the spring crops in field 2? Oats, barley, and you mentioned legumes, peas, beans, lentils. They had a kind of double duty role, right?
They did. They were the secret weapon of the whole system. So the oats and barley were crucial for animal feed. The high-energy oats especially were needed to power the horses that were starting to pull the heavy plows.
Right.
But the legumes, the peas, the beans, they did two amazing things. First, they were a game changer for human nutrition. They gave people a reliable source of protein, which was really missing from the average peasant's diet of just bread.
And the second thing.
Second thing, they gave the soil a power boost.
How does that work?
It's a natural process we now call nitrogen fixation. Legumes have this incredible, almost magical ability to pull nitrogen gas right out of the air and, through their roots, convert it into compounds in the soil that plants can use.
So wait, they're basically making their own fertilizer while they grow.
That's a perfect way to put it. They are recharging the soil with nitrogen, which is a vital nutrient for the next crop. So the field that grew peas this spring would be much richer, much healthier for the demanding winter wheat crop that was going to be planted there next autumn.
That's brilliant. You're fixing the soil and harvesting food at the exact same time.
It is the very definition of sustainable agriculture.
But hold on. If the legumes are so great at fertilizing the land, why did you still need field 3 to be fallow? Why not just plant legumes all the time and skip the empty field?
Because even that has its limits. Legumes are great for nitrogen, but crops pull out other nutrients too. You can't just farm continuously without eventually depleting the soil completely. They didn't have modern chemical fertilizers, so that rest period was still essential.
So what was happening in that fallow field? Was it just dirt?
Oh no, not at all. The fallow field had a secret job. Weeds and wild grasses would grow on it, and then the village would drive all their animals, their sheep, their cattle, onto that field to graze.
Ah, so they're eating the weeds.
They're eating the weeds, and they're leaving behind manure. They were walking fertilizer machines. That manure recycles all sorts of other crucial nutrients, like phosphorus and potassium, back into the land, so that empty-looking field was actually working really hard to prepare for next year's planting.
Wow. The whole system is so interconnected. And the result of all this planning wasn't just, bigger piles of grain. It fundamentally changed people's health.
It was a massive upgrade in their quality of life. Before, most poor people were just eating carbs, mainly from bread. With a steady supply of peas and beans, they were suddenly getting much more protein.
And what does that do for a population?
It makes them healthier, stronger, kids grow taller, people are more resistant to diseases. You see a real, measurable improvement in public health.
And healthier people live longer, they can work harder, and the population can grow. If we connect this new stability to the bigger picture, this surplus of food must have had a huge economic effect.
You can't overstate the impact. With hunger becoming less of an immediate threat, the population of Europe nearly doubled over a couple of centuries, and that surplus food could be sold.
At local markets.
Exactly, and when not every single person has to spend all day, every day, just growing enough food to survive, people are free to do other things. They can specialize.
So we're talking about the birth of jobs that aren't farming.
Precisely. If a farmer can reliably grow 16% more food than his family needs, he can sell it. And the person who buys it can now afford to be a full-time blacksmith, or a miller, or a weaver. This specialization is what allows villages to grow into towns, and towns into cities. The three-field system literally built the economic foundation for the medieval city.
But to farm on that scale across those 3 huge fields, you'd need better tools, right? The old ways wouldn't keep up.
Right. The new system drove technological innovation. The first big one was the heavy iron plow.
So stronger than the old wooden ones.
Much stronger. It could cut deep into the heavy, sticky clay soils you find all over northern Europe. Turning that soil over buried the weeds and brought fresh nutrients to the surface.
But dragging a massive iron plow through thick clay must have been incredibly slow and difficult.
It was, and that's why the second invention was so important. The horse collar.
A horse collar.
Yeah. See, the old style of harness for a horse actually pressed on its throat when it pulled something heavy. It was basically choking the animal. It severely limited how much power they could use. The new horse collar design was brilliant. It shifted the pressure from the horse's windpipe to its broad shoulders and chest.
So the horse could actually breathe and use its full strength.
Yes. Suddenly, a horse could pull that heavy iron plow much more effectively. And horses are way faster and have more stamina than oxen. Speed was now essential to get those huge fields plowed and planted on time, and the horse collar made that possible.
It's amazing how all these pieces fit together. The organization, the crops, the tools, and that cooperation we talked about earlier. It seems like that's the glue holding it all together.
It really is. The system mandated community management. The villagers had to agree on everything, which led to stronger local governance like village councils. It turned a bunch of individual farmers into a single, coordinated team.
And it seems like they had this incredible long-term view. I mean, this sounds a lot like what we'd call sustainable farming today.
It absolutely was. By using legumes, rotating crops, and using animal manure, they were maintaining the health of the soil naturally. They weren't depleting their main resource.
And that fallow period prevented the soil from getting exhausted and just blowing away.
Exactly. It prevented erosion. That's why these communities could stay in one place and farm the same land for centuries. They understood that you have to work with nature, not just take from it.
So when you trace it all back, the rise of towns, of trade, of specialized jobs, it all depended on having a stable food supply first. And this simple organizational shift from 2 fields to 3 was the key that unlocked everything.
It's a perfect example of how a clever, community-based plan can solve a massive problem. It shows that sometimes how you organize yourselves is even more powerful than any single new piece of technology.
And it's fascinating that the core principles, crop rotation, using legumes, letting land rest, are still being used by organic farmers today to keep their soil healthy without chemicals.
The basic ideas were that sound.
So as you look at the big challenges we face today, it's worth thinking about how often the solution might not be some brand new invention, but just a smarter way of organizing the resources we already have. Good luck with your studies.